but I know your power only just came on overnight. Just because you are in Baton Rouge, give us a sense of what it is like on the ground right now in the wake of the hurricane.
Depends on where you are in the state. If you're down in the Homa area, I flew over yesterday with the Coast Guard. There's massive destruction, massive flooding. The kind of homes that you would expect to do worse did worse. For example, those that lived in trailers. Similarly with Laplace, Louisiana. Even going north of Lake Pontchartrain, there's still flooding we could see north of Lake Pontchartrain, which is Covington, Hammond area going into Livingston Parish. And unfortunately, those rivers are still rising. So the floodwaters could still rise in those areas as well. So we're not through yet. I think the acute risk to life is done, but in terms of ongoing flooding as well as destruction of property, that's still happening.
It's 16 years on since the day, very eerie from Katrina. And post-Katrina, the levees, the pumps, all the infrastructure was rebuilt. Your original assessment, was this was a huge test. Did it work?
It did work. The levees obviously withstood. The pump stations have lost electricity, but that's kind of a different issue. There was a power line, they said, did not budge during Katrina, but fell during Ida. On the other hand, I do think that points out we can prepare and we can mitigate damage, we can minimize loss of life. And that's why I'm, by the way, supporting the infrastructure bill. It has money for coastal restoration, hardening the grid, ecosystem restoration. I could go on, but it helps prepare not just Louisiana, our entire nation for future such events.
I'd like to ask you more about that infrastructure component, Senator, but with regard to what's happening right now, the loss of power is a serious issue, I understand, for about 1 million people across the state in New Orleans and statewide. That doesn't just mean you don't have the lights and air conditioning on a day that I know you'll be feeling 90 degrees in Louisiana, but it also could create problems with people pumping gas, getting water. How long will it be before people get the power back?
Entergy has not yet indicated that. There are generators. I was on a congressional call this morning speaking with FEMA. They tell me they're coordinating with the state as to where to put their generators. Obviously, hospitals are a priority, but so should sewer lift stations. You don't want raw sewage backing up into people's homes. Clearly, that's a public health hazard. To that end, the parish president of Jefferson Parish, Cynthia Lee Shang, has asked folks, if you're out of JP, Jefferson Parish, don't come home yet, because the sewer system is not yet restored and they don't want to further stress. So energy is important, not just for hospitals, but also for public health. Then think of the individual who might be on home oxygen. She would be, if she doesn't have a generator, she's in tough shape right now.
Senator, last time we spoke, we were on Capitol Hill. We were talking about infrastructure, and it's moments like these that we get a reality check. I wonder what is inside the bill that you helped to negotiate, that you helped to craft, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that would help to shore up what you need in terms of resources along the coastline, the bayous and the wetlands that act as the lungs of the Gulf.
Yeah, so specifically for wetlands and such like that, there's billions for coastal restoration and ecosystem restoration. But no matter where you are in the nation, if you live near a coastline on the Great Lakes, Atlantic, Pacific, or Gulf, you've had problems with loss of beachfront, therefore increased risk of flooding. There's $3.5 billion for flood mitigation efforts, targeting in particular those areas that have recently flooded. There's also money to harden the grid. So when storms arise like this, you don't lose power because it falls over. There's also $65 billion to give access to high-speed internet no matter where you live in the country. Now, in a sense, you may say, what does that have to do with the storm? Believe me, when FEMA and the state are promoting information over social media, where to go to evacuate, where not to go to evacuate, you understand that universal access to broadband internet is part of an emergency response system.
I also wanted to get your sense, 2 million barrels a day of refining capacity has been wiped offline. This is the heart, basically, of American refining of our oil and gas infrastructure, and this is why we are seeing higher gasoline prices. Have you been in touch with these companies, and when do you think they'll come back online?
So I've heard that they've got a lot of products stored, which may mitigate immediate gas increases. On the other hand, we've obviously seen inflation over this year over last year, and a lot of that has been into energy. The rapidity by which this production is back online obviously depends upon a lot of factors. I will say that for refining capacity is typically in areas of the state in which electricity and water are being restored more quickly. And so I'd like to think that will happen. In terms of receiving product to refine by ship, the river's not yet open, I don't think, for open commerce, but that should happen pretty quickly. I'll finish by saying this, though. When you talk about whether or not in an earlier segment on your show, will OPEC plus one increase production? They may not, because looking at prices, Louisiana and the rest of our country has the ability to increase production. This administration has chosen not to increase leases, to promote production, to put Americans to work, but also to keep our prices down, to make us less dependent on OPEC. I think that's an indictment of this administration's policies.
Senator Cassidy, we're dedicating the bulk of this hour to the events in Afghanistan, the end of a 20-year war. I know that you were urging President Biden, the administration, to extend the timeline and stay longer beyond this day to help every American and every Afghan ally get out of the country. Now that we are gone, we're hearing from the president, who will speak a bit later on today, that the Taliban has made a commitment to safe passage for Americans, and I can only assume at least some of our Afghan allies. How will that happen, and do you believe that will work?
Well, first, I'm going to dispute a little bit. I think this had long ago ceased to be a hot war for the United States. It had become somewhat of a Cold War in which we were supporting Afghani allies as they maintained the control of the country. And so I'll kind of dispute that characterization. We only had 2,500 troops there. Yes, a few more contractors, but point being is that our troops were safe, minimal activity, supporting a free Afghani army. Now, that said, we do need a land bridge. We got to find a country to take them first, and it probably should be headed by the UN. That just seems logical to me. On the other hand, I've not really seen the actions by the UN to begin that process. There are a lot of folks still there. Family members of American citizens, you mentioned earlier, that might be why they're not leaving. Christians, women who have achieved greater roles in society, which would be threatening to the Taliban's belief system, therefore at risk of being not just squashed, but maybe killed. So there's a lot of folks there that need to be evacuated. Ideally, Pakistan would open its borders, and ideally the UN would head it.
Senator, I know you've been deeply involved in some of these, especially women and girls groups, trying to get them out and offer your assistance. Likely Qatar, Turkey potentially secure the airport. What are you hearing in terms of that operation? So civilian flights could continue.
It would be good if civilian flights continue. Of course, I think it has to shake out a couple things. The Turks are taking over the airport. The Taliban still presumably has to let people in. And what criteria will they select to let people in? Again, the United States created so much opportunity for women, not just for civics engagement, but for artistic engagement, for an expression of their personhood. And the Taliban may find that threatening and may seek to squash it. So we don't yet know how to play it out. And the reason I took exception on the longest war is, one, it wasn't hot. It was more like the situation in Germany vis-a-vis the Russians than it was as it started originally. And two, the progress that was made for a society that had been held in medieval times, coming into modernity for those who otherwise would be totally persecuted, was just tremendous. There's going to be a great loss here.